When the bank refused Barron Trump his money, they thought they were just turning away another guy in a hoodie. What they didn't know was that they had just pushed the red button, setting off a chain of events that would become their worst nightmare. But that's not even the best part. Let's start from the beginning. It was one of those icy December mornings when the cold cuts straight through your jacket, no matter how thick it is. Barron Trump, all 6'7" of him, strolled into the local bank with his usual low-key vibe. Sure, the Trump name came with a mountain of attention, but he wasn't about to play the role. His outfit said it all: plain jeans, a baggy hoodie, and a basketball cap pulled low. Still, there was something about him, maybe the way he carried himself, that always seemed to make people look twice. The bank wasn't crowded. A handful of people stood in line, shuffling forward slowly while keeping one eye on their phones. Barron slipped his hands into his hoodie pockets, letting out a small breath as he waited. The cashier behind the counter, a young woman named Carrie, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Her lips were pinched and her fingers drummed against the desk in a way that screamed, "Why am I here?" When it was finally Barron's turn, he stepped forward, offering a polite smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice even. "I'd like to withdraw $10,000 from my account." Carrie blinked at him like he'd just asked her to hand over the bank's keys. Her eyes darted up and down, taking in his casual outfit, her expression quickly turning skeptical. "Do you have identification?" she asked, her tone dripping with thinly veiled condescension. Without missing a beat, Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out his driver's license. He placed it on the counter, his movements calm and deliberate. Carrie picked it up, her eyes scanning the card. Then she froze. Her brows shot up as if she'd just seen a ghost. "Wait a second. Mr. Trump, are you sure this is your account?" Her voice carried an edge, the kind that said, "I'm not buying this." Barron's jaw tightened, but his expression stayed composed. "Yeah, I'm sure. Feel free to check your system," he replied, his tone still polite but firm. Carrie let out a dramatic sigh, like she'd been asked to climb a mountain, and headed toward a nearby office. Through the glass walls, Barron could see her speaking with a man who had corporate superiority written all over him. That must have been her manager, Mr. Baker, middle-aged, clean-shaven, and oozing the kind of arrogance that comes with too many years behind a desk. They whispered back and forth, stealing glances at Barron like he was some kind of puzzle they couldn't solve. After a minute, Baker emerged, straightening his tie as if preparing for battle. "Mr. Trump," he began, drawing out the name like it was a foreign language. "Unfortunately, we can't process your request today. Your account details seem questionable." Barron raised an eyebrow, his patience wearing thin. "Questionable?" he repeated. "This is my account. Check it again." Baker offered a stiff smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps you've mistaken us for another bank. I suggest you return to the branch where the account was originally opened." For a moment, Barron just stood there, processing the absurdity of the situation. His fingers itched to slam his fist on the counter, but he wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. Instead, he inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay calm. "Got it," he said coolly, spinning on his heel and walking out the door. Outside, the cold air hit him like a slap, but it did little to cool his irritation. Pulling out his phone, he fired off a quick text to his dad. "Dad, looks like your bank doesn't know how to do its job. Call me when you can." As he slid the phone back into his pocket, Barron allowed himself a small smirk. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If there was one thing he had learned growing up as a Trump, it was that situations like this rarely ended quietly. Barron was halfway through demolishing a turkey sandwich in the family kitchen when his phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with the name Dad. He swallowed his bite, wiping his hands on a napkin before answering. "Barron," his father's unmistakable voice came through, sharp and to the point. "What happened?" "Oh, nothing major," Barron replied with his trademark sarcasm. "Your bank decided I'm some kind of fraudster and wouldn't let me access my own money. You know, just your average day." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Barron could practically hear the gears turning in his dad's mind. Then, in that low, commanding tone that could make even the boldest people break a sweat, Donald said, "Got it. Give me an hour." Barron smirked. When his dad said an hour, it didn't mean 60 minutes of idle waiting. It meant fireworks. And right on cue, 58 minutes later, A sleek black SUV rolled up to the bank like it owned the place. Because, well, technically, it kind of did. Barron stood across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost. He took a sip from his coffee, watching the spectacle unfold like it was his personal matinee. The SUV door opened, and out stepped two security guards who looked like they could bench press the entire building. Then came the man himself, Donald Trump, in his signature tailored suit and that commanding stride that screamed, "I'm here to fix this." "Here we go," Barron muttered to himself, suppressing a laugh. The moment Donald entered the bank, it was like someone hit the pause button on reality. The room froze. Customers stopped mid-sentence, employees straightened up like soldiers at roll call, and even the sound of typing on keyboards came to an abrupt halt. Donald didn't glance around or acknowledge the stares. He walked straight to the counter, his presence impossible to ignore. "Get me Baker," he demanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Carrie, the cashier from earlier, visibly paled. Her hands fumbled as she picked up the phone to call her manager. Moments later, Baker appeared, his usual air of smugness, replaced by a look of sheer panic. His tie was slightly askew, and he was already sweating through his dress shirt. "Mr. Trump," Baker stammered, forcing a nervous smile. "What an unexpected surprise." "Unexpected?" Donald's voice boomed, bouncing off the marble walls. "Let me make something clear. My son came in here, a customer of my bank, and was treated like a criminal. Do you have any idea how unacceptable that is?" The tension in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Carrie, standing behind Baker, looked like she was praying for the ground to swallow her whole. "Sir, I assure you this was a misunderstanding," Baker began, his voice shaking. "If we had known—" "You didn't know because you didn't bother to check," Donald interrupted, his tone icy. "Spare me the excuses." He turned slightly, nodding to one of the security guards who had followed him in. Without a word, the guard handed over a sleek black folder. Donald flipped it open, barely glancing at the contents before slapping it onto the counter. "Here's something you might find interesting," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This bank? It's mine, and if my son is ever disrespected here again, both of you will be out of a job before you can say severance package." Baker's face turned an impressive shade of red, while Carrie looked like she was about to faint. For a moment, no one dared to speak. "Do I make myself clear?" Donald asked, his gaze sharp enough to pierce steel. "Yes, sir," Baker mumbled, his head bobbing like a bobblehead doll. Donald straightened his jacket, his business concluded. He didn't wait for a response as he turned on his heel and strode toward the door. Barron, watching from across the street, couldn't hold back a grin. This wasn't just a bank visit. It was a masterclass in how to handle a situation with maximum impact. As the SUV doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, Barron finally let out a laugh. The look on Baker's face? Priceless. But he wasn't done just yet. He had a feeling the fallout from this little scene was going to be even more entertaining. By the next morning, the internet was ablaze. Apparently, one of the customers at the bank had caught the whole Trump storm on video and wasted no time uploading it to social media. The clip wasn't just circulating, it was exploding. In less than 6 hours, it had racked up millions of views, with hashtags like #TrumpBankMeltdown and #BarronDeserves better trending nationwide. Comments rolled in faster than a Black Friday stampede. Some users were all in on Team Barron, calling out the bank staff for their obvious prejudice. Others, predictably, turned it into a comedy show, cracking jokes about rich kid problems and how Barron probably didn't even need the cash. Barron, meanwhile, sat on the couch in his living room, scrolling through the Thababdazcase on his phone. He couldn't stop laughing. "Dude," he muttered to himself, chuckling as he read a particularly sarcastic comment, "they really think I asked for this?" The video had turned his casual bank visit into a nationwide debate, but for Barron, it was like watching a live reality show where he accidentally got cast as the main character. The icing on the cake? The bank's PR team was scrambling to save face, issuing vague apologies and promising to review internal practices. While the internet had its fun, the bank's CEO was dealing with a much less entertaining situation, a direct call from Donald Trump himself. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but by the end of it, the CEO was sweating bullets. Donald didn't waste time with pleasantries. His message was crystal clear: fix the problem, or you'll be the next one out the door. By the following morning, Carey and Baker found themselves on the receiving end of termination notices. Their desks were cleared out before they even had time to process what had happened, and that was just the beginning. Donald had ordered a full audit of the branch's staff and practices, determined to weed out any other questionable behaviors. Back at home, Barron watched the whole thing unfold with a mix of amusement and satisfaction. He hadn't asked for the drama, but now that it was here, he couldn't deny how entertaining it was to see the system crumble under its own arrogance. Later that afternoon, Barron made one last trip to the bank. Not because he needed anything, but because he couldn't resist seeing the aftermath in person. The atmosphere inside was tense, to say the least. Employees were on edge, avoiding eye contact like their lives depended on it. When he reached the counter, the new cashier greeted him with a nervous smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Trump. How can we assist you today?" Barron smirked, sliding his withdrawal slip across the counter. "Just here to get my money. You know, the usual." The transaction was processed in record time, with not a single question asked. As he pocketed the cash, Barron couldn't help but throw out one final comment before leaving. "This is what happens when you try to stop a Trump," he said, his tone light but pointed. The cashier gave a weak chuckle, clearly unsure how to respond. Barron walked out, letting the door swing shut behind him. That evening, as he recounted the events to his dad over dinner, Donald leaned back in his chair, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Remember this, Barron," he said, his voice steady and serious. "Never let anyone belittle you, no matter how small the situation might seem. Stand your ground, always." Barron nodded, a sly grin on his face. He didn't need a reminder. It was a lesson he'd already learned firsthand. As far as he was concerned, the whole ordeal had been more entertaining than any movie he'd seen recently. And if nothing else, it was proof that underestimating a Trump was always a bad idea. How would you have handled this situation if you were in Barron's shoes? What's your take on the way things unfolded? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or anyone you know ever experienced something similar? Don't forget to like and share this story if it resonated with you. This story was created to shed light on important issues and inspire positive change in the world. Your voice matters, and together, we can make a difference. Your opinion has value. Let it be heard. Let it be.